Today I'm going to show how I created a touchless portable hand washing station using mostly materials which I found at my local Habitat for Humanity restore. I began looking online for portable hand washing stations, and most of the ones I found were not touchless. I did find some commercial hand washing stations, but they were both expensive and on back order for several months. Many of the DIY hand washing stations that I found online used 5-gallon buckets, so I figured that would be a good place to start. Some of the designs I saw used a siphon pump that you would pump with your foot, but I decided to try and make mine gravity fed rather than requiring a pump. I did see several designs built on a frame with some sort of catch basin and a bucket underneath to catch the gray water, and I decided this bathroom sink vanity would work well. Now this may not be the most cost-effective way to build this portable sink if you had to buy the vanity new, but I found this one fairly inexpensive at the Habitat for Humanity restore. So the first thing I did was remove the faucet from the sink, since I wouldn't be using it and it would be in the way of the shelf that I needed to mount for the supply water bucket. The buckets that I'm using are just 5-gallon drywall compound buckets, which I had laying around from a renovation project. Now, if you think anyone may be drinking from this faucet, I recommend that you stop by your local home store and pick up a food safe 5-gallon bucket. I found this one relatively inexpensive, but for our purposes for this video, we're just going to use the drywall compound bucket. Now, most of the portable hand washing stations I found for camping had a twist open valve, and I decided to go with more of a lever style spout to make it easier to adapt for the hands-free operation. This one here has a 3/4 inch supply, so I just drilled a 3/4 inch hole through the bottom of the bucket. You'll want to get the hole drilled about as close as you can to the bottom, but make sure that you leave room to get the nut twisted on the inside. The valve comes with a couple rubber washers. You'll put one on each side, tighten it down to make sure that it doesn't leak. So next, you'll need a shelf on which to mount the supply bucket over top of the sink. So I used a piece of solid 1x12 pine. You could probably also use a piece of plywood. I would probably avoid using OSB plywood or pressed board, as they don't hold up quite as well to water. You'll also notice here that I put some small blocks of wood around the bucket to try and keep it in place. I did go ahead and pre-drill and countersink those pieces there to make sure that I didn't split them when I tightened them down. The board itself, 1x12 is about 11.5 inches wide, and so I basically just cut it square, so it's approximately 11.5 by 11.5. So for the back of the shelf underneath for support, I added a shelf bracket like this. You can see this one here is 10 inch by 12 inch. It's a little bit longer on the bottom, which is kind of nice. It gives you the extra support. And it did stick out just a little bit beyond. I just went ahead and cut that off there. That also helps keep the overall sink lightweight for easy moving, using the bracket rather than building it up with more wood. So now with the supply bucket firmly mounted in place over top of the sink, I basically just needed another bucket underneath to catch the gray water. So I just put this bucket in underneath, and the tailpiece from the drain here, I did cut off probably about 1.5 inches of it so that the bucket would fit underneath more easily. So with these two buckets now in place, we now essentially have a fully functional, manually operated hand washing station. But I wanted to go one step further and make mine touchless. So we will show you next how we went about doing that. So to demonstrate how the hands-free operation works, I went ahead and took the top of our sink off so that I can show you how everything works. So you may recognize some of these parts here. This is actually bicycle caliper brakes. And so I bought a set of these online to use to pull the lever on the spout. So mounted here on the door of the cabinet, you may recognize that as a handle for brakes. So that's mounted there. Now, this is typically mounted on a handlebar, obviously. So I went ahead and flattened out the bracket some so that it would fit better on the flat face of the cabinet door. As far as location for that, I tried to place it on the cabinet at a comfortable height where most people would be able to push it in with their knee. So you may need to experiment a little bit with that. This one is approximately 21 inches off the floor. So this here is the other side of the bicycle caliper set. So this piece here fits into the handle like that. You've got this little metal cap there to protect the end of the sleeve. And so once you've got this together, when you pull on the lever, it pulls this little metal cable through from one end to the other. And that's what I'm going to use to hook up to the valve on the sink. So now you can see this black sleeve. I drilled a hole through the face of the cabinet here to run that through. And I wanted to make sure that I made that a nice easy curve there because I don't want that cable getting kinked up or jammed up in there. So I ran the cable clear across the cabinet and brought it in here. So inside here you can see I left plenty of slack, so that gives us plenty of room to slide our bucket in without obscuring anything. So you can see there. And then of course that runs up here to the caliper assembly. Now that started out looking like this. So if you have a bicycle, you may recognize this fitting around your bicycle wheel as the brakes. As far as the caliper itself, I really didn't need that. What I was looking for mostly is this spring. So originally I had hoped to run this steel cable directly up to the spout, but the spout didn't have quite enough resistance to pull it back on its own. So I went ahead and I used the caliper assembly here to get that spring action to provide the resistance I needed to pull the cable back and allow it to retract. So on your bicycle, when this is hooked up, so these would be closed together, your steel cable would run through here and then be fastened on underneath this nut here. And so what happens is when you pull on your brake cable, it cinches that together and causes you to come to a stop. So for us, this is just going to provide spring action to help our lever here. You can see even without the sink in place, the tension of the spring on the calipers causes that cable to retract. This also, having this in place, takes a little bit of the load off of the spout. We're kind of expecting this may get some heavy use, so I didn't necessarily want to wear out the spout, and I figure this should help expand the life of that. You may notice this bracket here looks a little bit different. So because this sink vanity is kind of small, I was concerned about having enough space in there. So I went ahead and cut this section off of the calipers. You can use any type of metal cutting blade, hacksaw, reciprocating saw. I actually used an angle grinder. And just as a disclaimer, with any power tools that you're using, make sure you follow all of the manufacturer's safety guidelines on the proper use of those. So I cut those off, and then also you'll notice when I squeeze these together, so both sides kind of move. Well, I wanted to kind of isolate that to only pull down on the one side. So rather than both sides moving, what I did is I took and I put a lag screw into the 2x6 here where this is mounted. And what that does is it limits the movement of this side of the caliper. And so when I push in on it, you'll see the other side moves, but the one side stays stationary because that bolt holds it there. And so typically on a bicycle, your cable would be cut here because all you're looking for is that squeezing motion there. So since we're running this on up to the faucet, I left this cable long, and this is what runs up through one of the spout holes in the sink to attach to the faucet. And so that is how we get our hands-free operation. Okay, so we've got our sink back together here, and you can see where I've pulled the cable up through one of these supply holes for the old faucet that we're no longer using. I brought it up and drilled a hole through our shelf here that the bucket sits on and ran it through there. That's to help keep it in alignment with the valve. You'll notice I drilled a small hole here in the valve to run the cable through. So we'll go ahead and poke that up through. All right. There are a couple of different ways you can secure this here on top. I decided to go with this small screw with a nut on the end of it. They also make these small crimp-on devices here. So you would just put that, slide that onto the cable and crimp it on. The thing I didn't like about this is I want to be able to remove this bucket if I need to, and if I crimp that on, then I would have to cut the cable in order to get it off. So the flexibility that this offers is it allows me to remove the cable from the spout so that if I ever need to remove the bucket from the sink, I can do that. So here we've got our cable run up through the spout, goes down through the board, down through the sink, wraps around the bucket, comes out the face here through our sleeve to our handle, and we've got hands-free sink. Well, thank you for watching. This was certainly my first attempt at building one of these. If you have better ideas, I hope that you can work those into your design. If you have any questions, please leave those in the comments. I'll try to respond to those. But hopefully this video will help you build your own portable DIY hands-free hand washing station. So stay safe, keep your hands washed, and we'll see you next time.